Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here today. This is my life. I've dedicated to it, and the interest in this is really timely at this point in our history, not only as a country, but as a world. And so I think in the next hour, this evolving threats discussion is going to lead us, or should lead us, to a lot of thought about how we're going to deal with these big picture items in the future. And with that, we're going to start with self-introductions of our panel. We'll flow from that into some thoughts from our panel. And then what I really want to do is get some really good questions before we'll wrap up in an hour. So with that, I'll pass it along to my cohort here, Ollie Gagnon. I'm not going to introduce Ollie, but I'm going to say that I've known Ollie probably 25 years. He's a man of mystery and many different disciplines, and brings a lot to the panel. Ollie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I know Mark a long time, so appreciate it. But good afternoon. Glad to be here today. I'm with Ollie Gagnon, the Chief Homeland Security Advisor and the Executive Director of the INL Resilience Optimization Center, Idaho National Lab, which is the Department of Energy Laboratory, located in Idaho Falls, eastern Idaho. And I thought this was so important, I drove here today. No, I still live in Dunedin, Florida. I never left when I got hired by the lab in 2018. I like to say I was remote before COVID and before it was cool. It was just a lot easier for me to get to Washington, D.C. from Tampa than it is from Idaho Falls, if you've ever been there, but a beautiful place. So why is the Department of Energy Idaho National Laboratory person here today? If you may not notice, but the national laboratories exist for solving complex challenges in the critical infrastructure space. We're the nation's nuclear laboratory, 890 square miles out there. Obviously, Department of Energy, we have a full-scale grid, water test bed, waterways test bed, but a lot of people don't realize that a big part of our portfolio is national and homeland security. And we do the most of any of the labs for the Department of Homeland Security. Most of that's in the cyberspace. So many of you heard the terms like ICS CERT, Industrial Control System CERT. It's been around a long time. That actually as Idaho National Lab. And we'll talk more about that. Before that, I spent almost 14 years here in Tampa as your Department of Homeland Security Protected Security Advisor, the first one that was rolled out in 2005. Worked all across the state. I can't wait till we do a Infrastructure Jeopardy game show because I am ready. It was my life to understand the infrastructure across Florida and especially in this area in like Port Tampa Bay and the importance and all the critical infrastructure. Before that, I spent 3 years with Department of Defense doing critical infrastructure assessments all over the world. And before that, 23 years in the Air Force.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. First off, thanks for having me. I'm Ernie Ferraresso. I'm the Senior Director, the Director of the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, otherwise known as Cyber Florida. And, you know, I was talking to some of the folks over lunch, and gee, I think we can talk a little bit about cyber today, maybe, I don't know. It seems to have come up in every aspect of, as we talk about emerging threats, evolving threats, and where we are in the 21st century and where we're going. And so our job at Cyber Florida is to, as we look to make Florida one of the leading states in cybersecurity, we focus a lot on critical infrastructure and cyber resilience. How do we make these organizations and entities more cyber secure? But also on the workforce side, how do we make more cyber workers and we make all people, workers in general, more attuned to, how do you live in the 21st century? And I think when we talk about it in the context of evolving threats, we've talked about a bit of how we're seeing the convergence between physical and cyber systems, the convergence of IT and OT. As much as we would like to say that we're going to have, whether it's physical separation or firewalls in place, that's not how the world trends. It trends towards more integration, regardless of how slow we try to stop it. We don't want to. How many people have their entire? I would be surprised if anybody in this audience does not have some sort of connected device in their house. So, those things connect automatically. And so that's just kind of how we're going. And so what does that mean? And so from the Cyber Florida perspective, it's working with individuals and organizations to get people to understand what that means in today's day and age. An example that I've used is, I'm going to use it. How many people are familiar with the Ford Pinto? It's a fine automobile from the 1970s. And by say fine, I don't mean fine. As you know, it had a critical design flaw in it, and that if it got hit in the rear, it would puncture the gas tank and then explode. So today, I think about that as that's basically how most of our software is basically designed, even though we don't know that those flaws exist. So think about it if you are having a fleet of vehicles and you went out and bought Ford Pintos because you happen to like the name or whatever, but then you just don't even bother to find out that there's this critical flaw in your, because you just said, I like Ford Pintos, so I went out and got that. Or the guy who sold you the Ford Pinto said it's the most reliable car. It's the same type of thing today with software and cyber technologies. We're going out and we're procuring these systems, these tools, and now they're also embedded in your hardware. An example is we've talked about the cranes with the Chinese manufacturer. That's an obvious one because, the cranes were manufactured in China. Now we're talking about systems that have several subsystems with components that even those manufacturers don't know the origins of them. And if you don't think that the adversaries are looking at how do I get into these things with sophisticated supply chain attacks, that's where you're fooling yourself. So it's understanding where all of having that level of awareness and asking those types of questions as you're looking to procure these systems. Those are the types of things that we need to think about, not just cyber people, but everybody as you're thinking of that, because I don't think there's any system or device that or application that is not, quote, cyber or cyber enabled along those lines. So it's getting people to think different about things. And that's one of the things that we try to do at Cyber Florida. And in addition is identifying those areas that when we talk about, okay, what are those critical risks? How do we find those types of vulnerabilities and get them out into the world? And then the other side of it is advocating for, we've had a good deal of talk about national and state level policy that is impeding things. It's identifying those, what are those impediments? What are those obstacles? Are they policy obstacles? And then working with our state and local and even federal legislators to how do we help them move the ball on either lowering the obstacles or putting the right obstacles in place so that our adversaries can't take part of it. But that's a long story long. Usually I'm a pretty jovial guy, but whatever. Anyway.
Jags?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Ernie. I think we missed an opportunity by not sending Ford Pintos out to our adversaries. Right? That would have been an amazing
It's a fine automobile, I'm telling you. Looks great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jags Kandasamy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Latent AI, and I'm also a non-resident fellow for GNSI. At Latent AI, we make AI to run at the tactical edge devices, right? Low swap, size, weight, and power. I have both cyber background as well as AI background. I built a company and sold it off a few years ago, and I started this about 6 years ago. I come from a law enforcement family background, so what Mark does and everybody around here does, it's close to my heart. I had about 6 people in my family that wore uniforms, so everything that happens on that side, I'm very closely aware of, and I'm always there to support from that point of view, right? A couple of things I wanted to touch on as we kick off this panel. AI is a tool. The other point is there is an imagination gap, right? The question is imagination gap to paranoia, right? You can think of all the possibilities and can go into a PTSD situation, or you don't have any type of imagination and you're just left vulnerable to be attacked, Right, with that, I'll turn it over to Mark. And
Thank you, Jags. We had a pre-call on this group, and so each person was asked to throw out a couple of things they'd want to talk about, and we're going to dive into that now. The diversity of this group is going to really show when they do a little bit of a deep dive into something that they're passionate about that involves port security and the relevant issues of evolving threats. And Ollie, I'll start with you again.
All right, thank you, Mark. You know, I'm fully aware that the name of this panel is Evolving Threats, but I'll be quite honest with you. I'm glad to see it's risk and resilience, because when you look at risk, I would say that threats, vulnerabilities, security are really just not that important. And people look at me when I say that. In fact, I did a presentation at S4 early this year in Tampa, big ICS conference, and a bunch of cybersecurity. I said, how many people here are cybersecurity professionals? And they all, you know, enthusiastically raised their hand. And I said, I'm originally from New York, and in mafia talk, you're dead to me. And what I meant was, I rarely say cybersecurity anymore. I say it's resilience. Because we even have a doctrine at INL called cyber-informed engineering, and it worked from the premise that they are already in your systems. So you have to engineer out the kill chain on your most consequence. So in risk, it's consequence, vulnerability, threat. Consequence is the primary driver. If you're not focused on consequence, you're going to be way behind continuously. If you're chasing threats, it's not going to work. If you're just trying to close vulnerabilities, but threats against what vulnerabilities that cause what impact is really the main driver. In this fast-moving environment. In fact, there's, you know, after 45 years of doing this and doing a lot of assessments all over the world, and I will tell you, in my 14 years in Tampa doing this, you can go into any management boardroom and very quickly assess where they are in operational risk by going, okay, group, tell me your top 3 critical cyber systems for your mission, and everybody's different. Tell me what order they're in. Tell me the physical and cyber dependencies. Tell me the stakeholders, both internal, external, and those dependencies, internal, external, and tell us the response and recovery plans for those. And a lot of times you'll get, you know, it looks, okay, maybe you don't have the right people in the room. So you go get the right people, and then they start arguing on which is the most important. They don't have it down. And if you don't have that down, it's very hard to, you know, to be able to address risks appropriately. And I'll be quite honest, I could count on one hand the organizations I ever walked into that had that as soon as you walked in the door. Now, the good news is they had the knowledge in the organization, but what tends to happen? Physical security is over here, HR is over here, procurement's over here, they're all doing their thing. You know, in terms of cyber-physical convergence, I'm a career physical security guy, but I figured about 20 years ago, as I started this job here in Tampa, that cyber is going to be the game coming forward. So I went and got my certifications and started going down that road, because you can't separate it. And if you were around during this time, you notice that if you look internationally, the term chief security officer used to be, you know, some former FBI guy or some physical security. It soon became what? The chief cyber person. And they starting to converge that. So that focus is, if I leave you one thing, it's really about having a lens where you're focused on consequence. And an easy way to understand that is just everybody can identify with. There's 5 human senses, right? You know, sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell, right? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. Which is the most important to you that you would hate to lose? And I would tell you, just from my experience of doing that, most people say it's sight, right? It's not smell, right? COVID killed that one. It's not taste. COVID killed that one too. But most generally, what do you just make there? You made a consequence choice there. So if you're worried about the threats to your body, and you walk into a room and you got a pair of safety glasses or a pair of hearing protection in a construction environment, and you only can make one choice, what are you going to choose? You're going to choose the safety glasses if you're making a conscious decision. So that's a very simple analogy, but you really have to focus from the consequence piece. Now, the other I say, we talked a bit earlier today about manufacturing and technological advances. The problem is what we're seeing, and we focus a lot on critical infrastructure. That's just what we do globally for both the defense side and Homeland Security. And that's great, but we are decades away from having all the components go through the manufacturing process, get where we need to be. In fact, DHS, somebody mentioned CISA, the Critical Infrastructure and Security Agency, they have a thing called Secure by Design. And what's that? That's building it in at the manufacturing level. Problem is, you have infrastructure out there now. We have a complementary approach called cyber-informed engineering. And it's about engineering out the kill chain. And what does that mean? Well, if you take that consequence-based approach, what is the cyber kill chain that causes you the largest impact? That's what you got to focus on first. If you're chasing threats, you're never gonna get there. If you're chasing trying to close vulnerabilities, you're never gonna get there. Now, I joked and said, threats and vulnerabilities and security is not that important. Well, they are. They're just not as important as consequence as your first consideration when you're looking at things. You want to be able to turn what if to even if. What if this happens? It's got to be even if this happens. If you focus on security, which I'd say is not a strategy, just look at the news where security has failed. Look at Salt Typhoon being in systems. It's there. You got to focus on what's most important because you don't have enough time. You don't have enough resources. And as early on, the general talked about the Florida Cyber Risk Assessment that was done. I've worked with Cyber Florida for the past 3 years on that. It's actually built off the cybersecurity evaluation tool, which we developed for DHS. We modified it with a cyber risk visualization. Something else, the gentleman mentioned a couple of data points here. One of the most interesting is we took the cybersecurity framework-based assessment and then looked at that, analyzed that with the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, NICE framework, which focused on cyber roles, tasks, and skills. And what we found that the most cyber risk was not on the technology side, it was on the management side. Managers don't understand cyber risk. They just don't. And they're making decisions in procurement, HR, operations, all across, and the technology team is cleaning up on aisle 6. So it's really about, that's a very important data point. Other things like small resource entities, counties, businesses, they don't have the resources to do it. So I'm really excited about working with Cyber Florida the past 3 years. I'm actually a senior fellow with them and speak about this effort. And they're doing what really no other state is doing. I can tell you that because all my counterparts when I was on the DHS side, no one's taken it to that level. So I think it's really that focus on, if you leave one thing today is that if you're having a discussion about cybersecurity and threats and vulnerabilities and somebody goes, well, this will happen, and you say, so what? What's the impact? And is that the thing we should be focusing on right now? Everybody's screaming in their head about ransomware. So what? There's 16 critical infrastructure sectors. It's 54 subsectors. If you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport. You've been to one port, you've been to one port. Every one of them is like a fingerprint. So you have to get the team that knows best, which is the organization. If you want to do coordination and collaboration, just go through that process and you know very quickly who you need to coordinate and collaborate with if you understand everything about your organization and what's important and what are the connections out there. Florida Peninsula, it's not an island. It's definitely not an infrastructure island. The state relies on many, many different things to include suppliers and vendors.
Yeah, Ollie, on that, you mentioned the cyber-informed engineering and the, talking about the risk assessment and management leaders and how that, taking the consequence-based approach, I think that's something that is, if I could foot stomp on that, meaning it's looking at it from that way, because then if you look at it, then it becomes, you're looking at it through the lens of the organization, not just through a quote, I'll call it security lens. And I think that also puts, it frames it up in the way that people can understand it that are not just, I'm looking at the table of the security folks because, you guys see it every day. But how do you convey, I think that the goggle thing is a good way to frame it, but how do you look at that and frame that up so that the senior management is thinking that way when they're talking about, okay, we're going to introduce a new tool, introduce a new system, and thinking through that, okay, is this how critical is it? okay, what happens if this bad thing happens, and then engineering it in, so to speak, that if the bad thing happens, the failover state is the safe state. And that's when we talk about it from the critical infrastructure side, on the electrical, for the the utility side. That's the failover state is it goes to a safe state. And how do you engineer your larger cyber infrastructure so that's the case? I mean, that's you'll hear about things like zero trust, but those are kind of the fundamentals in it. Is that it assumes that if something bad happens, it's going to move to a safe state, not allow follow-on cascading effects that are going to ripple through your whole network. Another thing to just to throw out is we talked a lot about evolving threats is the title. I think that if oftentimes we focus on or think about attribution, we focus on it a little too much when particularly if you're talking about it from the private sector, or if you're not in the law enforcement or Department of War or DHS side. The TTPs that the Chinese state actors use are very similar to the TTPs that criminal groups use. And it's like we talk about the difference between espionage and an act of war. From a small entity or a small company, what they intend to do once they're in is kind of irrelevant because they're still coming in. They're using the same types of tools, and so it's understanding that they're using those same types of TTPs and things. But a lot of those can be mitigated doing some of the basic stuff. The general mentioned patching. So on that same study that we continue doing, that's like it's the top two things. Multi-factor, it's identity and access management, multi-factor, and unpatched systems. This is another terrible pun or analogy. It's we talk about everything wants to be connected. We have the greatest theme parks here in the world with. And you go there on spring break, and there's hundreds of thousands of kids from all over the world bringing all kinds of germs and sicknesses and cold. Your odds are you're going to get sick. So what do? You bring your 85-year-old grandmother there with a compromised immune system, and you turn her loose, and you wonder why she gets sick. So that's we talk about the ship that's running the Windows XP. Well, there's your 85-year-old grandmother that you're going to roll into this theme park full of kids from all over the world. So it's making those decisions. It's, hey, are you patching your systems? Do you have a patch? Do you have a plan for end-of-life systems? I want to say what the Windows, right? Is Windows 10 just sunsetted? How many people are still running Windows 10? All right, they're not doing that anymore. That's when I say they, Microsoft. They've decided not to do Windows 10 anymore. There's probably a lot of people out there that are still using that. So when the new 0 day from that comes out, you're on your own. So just those are the types of things. And I know certainly from the federal government side, IT system upgrades, system refresh. That was always you for money, end of year, unfunded request funds. And if that's your plan to upgrade your systems, you're already behind because that also sets a tone as where you put your priorities. So those are the types of things. And the other thing, just a little weird anecdote. You heard about the Louvre heist? Ready for this? What do you think the password? I'm not joking. The password for their CCTV cameras was? Close. It was Louvre. Close. And the username was the brand name of the camera system. So yeah. So if you think password management is important, there you go.
Let me take a little different twist from the AI perspective, right? So one of the work that we have done for the US Navy was around deploying sonar-based AI models to detect mines and other objects of interest on the seafloor. Why is it important from maritime security as well as from a port security point of view? With the development of unmanned systems, I'm not talking about aerial systems, I'm talking about underwater and surface vehicles, right? I can create something that is the size of my palm, right? with a small battery and let it sit there. Like I think Stu mentioned this. You can let it sit there, collect passive data. It's a Trojan horse that's deployed. It can come alive anytime. Think of it like, sleeper cells underwater. Ports around the Middle East, around the Horn of Africa and Hormuz Strait, they're actively sweeping their ports for vulnerabilities like this, right? With AI in itself is a non-deterministic system. What do I mean by that? If I have a deterministic system, like a regular programming stuff, I ask the question, what is 2 plus 2? The answer is always 4. That is the deterministic system. In a non-deterministic world, in an AI system, if I ask what is 2 plus 2, it'll say, I'm 98% confident it is 4. Right? That's what non-deterministic systems do. So let's take that parallel into a security risk and resilience perspective, right? I don't need to alter your course 100%. I don't need to defect and deflect you 100%. I just need to do a couple of percentage every week. It becomes a normal. You take it as an annoyance in the first day. The second day it's an annoyance. Third day becomes normal. Fourth day you start to ignore it. Now that becomes your base. Now what do? You deviate it another couple of points the following week. Again, it's an annoyance. You go through the same cycle and it becomes the baseline. Over a 6-month period, you were starting at, let's say, a 98% accurate system. Now it's at 70%. You think that's the new normal, and you survive. You live with that. The enemy has won from there. And this is what AI systems are capable. AI is, again, a tool. It's a great tool if you use it correctly, right? I used to hack in the 90s, right? Like as a kid, I used to hack, and it was just for the fun of it. I would hack in, backdoor to somebody's website and put, Jags was here, right? And you leave. You didn't do anything. Then in the 2000s and 2010s, as you saw these cyber attacks that were happening, it was all around credit card theft. The Target hack that happened in the mid-2010s was through the HVAC systems, the third-party contractor. Through them, they got in. And of course, everybody goes right to the payment card systems. And they collected all the unencrypted card data, and then they started selling. The carding happened for that. So that's one level of breach that happens. But when we come into physical security, think about the ramification. It is not just financial crime. It is actually about creating terror within our ranks, right? A lot of people don't like our way of life, don't like our values. And physical systems provide them that capability, that ability to instill fear and terror among us, right? And AI is being applied in a heavy manner with autonomous systems and through cyber mechanisms to attack, right?
Thank you, guys. One of the questions we got from the audience that I want to put a little spin on, they talked about the need for diversity within the workforce. When we first came up with evolving threats as a topic, I'll be the first to tell you, drones was what we were thinking about, like that would be an interesting topic. Obviously it is, because people have talked about it all day long, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more on this panel. But one of the other things I saw as an evolving threat was our workforce and how our workforce is changing. I think COVID really sent home a message to me in my environment, because people started adjusting the way they did their workplace habits, and we had to adjust to them from a security perspective. So I want to ask each of the panelists a question. If you, as an evolving threat, the workforce, where do you see the gaps in today's current picture of security, and how we're not, with this thinking about USF being the lead for this program, where are we missing the boat on workforce development and training? I'll start with you, Ollie.
Okay, Thank you. Actually, we've done a lot of work in this space with a maturity model. There's a lot of maturity models out there. You think about CSF and others, cybersecurity framework. This was a maturity model that was focused strictly on the workforce, and we applied this at the counterparts to ports, airports, and looking at the workforce. One of the things that we found in terms of maturity level is that the workforce generally, and I mean everybody from the tech people to the senior management. Okay, everybody's in the cyber resilience game. You have to have some amount of training, but the majority of still the culture is the annual security awareness training, and you're good. And it's not enough. That's continually going to put the workforce. That's going to put the workforce behind. The other is we're not integrating the needs properly into the hiring process. I mean, you all are familiar that it's companies, I won't name them, are pilfering our people. We're pilfering other people. We're all going for the expertise, right? We all need the expertise. There's just not enough of that. One of the things we're doing, even as a national lab, we're working with universities and with K through 12 to get that integrated early on. So for example, I mentioned cyber-informed engineering. That needs to be in engineering programs at colleges. Engineers need to be thinking about cyber as their engineering, right? Makes sense. So you're integrating that into the game. So there's just not enough across the board when it comes. The other is we're still finding where you see a job position. I'll give one. It was an airport. It was county owned. And for every position they hired within the county that was information technology or operational technology, and if you're not familiar with it, operational technology is basically cyber that can cause a physical effect. Think water system, power system, building systems. And they had the same 5 job descriptions for any position, but the airport in that county hires through the county system. So they're hiring somebody and they bring them to the airport. Guess what they have to do? They have to train them. And then there's a training gap there to get them up to speed to be able to operate in that environment. So integrating true vulnerabilities and what the cyber gaps are to translating that to the workforce and integrating everything through early education to mid to higher education to things like the HR process. And even I mentioned earlier, people like procurement, when they're procuring things, are they really trained enough to be able to flag things that may have some cyber impact? Fortunately, Cyber Florida is tackling this. One of the things they're getting ready to roll out in their Florida Cyber Risk Assessment, I talked about that mapping between the cybersecurity framework, which is the question set for the assessment. We're integrating that NICE, National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education framework, which really NIST puts out as a spreadsheet. We're integrating as a capability, so you'll get a report. Here's your top gaps. Here's the role, skills, and tasks that causes you that relate to those gaps that you have. Preliminary analysis looking at the statewide results show that we could point to 14 skills that account for all the top 10 gaps across Florida based on the collection of assessments across 16 sectors. And then you can narrow that down by sector, subsector, and geographic area. So there's a few pieces there. It's getting in early, it's focusing the positions on the right skill set, it's training people to the right skill set. There's a bigger void. Cyber is a big problem. OT is a bigger problem than IT, to be quite honest, because of the impact and what people are working with, and that can cause those catastrophic impacts.
Yeah, I think, and thanks for the plug there on the...
You're welcome. Brian made me do that.
It's really, to kind of keep on that, I think there's two aspects to it. First is that as a generalized society, we have to all learn how to live in the 21st century. I think there's an assumption that if you grow up, you probably heard the term. There were Gen Z. There's another gen, the younger that they're quote digital natives, and that they've grown up using technology, so they kind of know what's going on. Well. My version of that was, my folks would come to me, hey, Ernie, can you program the VCR? Because they didn't know how to set the clock or, to record Falcon Crest or whatever. So I could do that, But if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, I need you to adjust the recording head or the tape speed, or explain how the tape, I don't know what you're talking about. So the idea that we're giving, that kids grow up and they have a very sophisticated computing device in their hand, and they know how to operate it and everything that happens, all the risks of driving it on Al Gore's information superhighway with no speed limits, and we're fooling ourselves on that. So like Ollie says, it's starting at a very young age and getting everybody to understand what it's like to live in the 21st century in an interconnected world where you wouldn't open your door to a stranger, but you'll friend somebody. Do you friend people anymore? Whatever it is, the Instagram, I'm dating myself, but that's a whole other story I can tell you about the high school kids that laughed at me when I talked about Facebook, but nobody uses that anymore. Okay, thanks. But on that, getting everybody to understand how that lives, what's it like to live in today's world. And then secondly on that is on the technology and the advanced, the more technology and cyber workforce side. And that involves just realigning some of the work responsibilities and roles and making sure that people understand what their roles are in things. Because if we look at, when Ali mentioned the nice cybersecurity workforce framework, if you look at a significant portion of those work roles are not, quote, cybersecurity specific work roles. They're generalized technology folks. So you've probably heard about securely provision, maintain, operate and maintain these. Those are all generalized IT operations or operations folks. So it's broader than just, this is just the realm of cyber folks. So I think that's the key on it, is understanding that it's everybody's responsibility, particularly when you start talking about it. It's everybody's responsibility. We need to be technologically informed or attuned to understand how technology and cyber impacts your daily lives, particularly as we look now as artificial intelligence comes in. And I think you made a great point about the imagination gap, of doing nothing and then paranoia. I think people on AI now, it's, Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to show up naked on a ball here and start killing us all, otherwise known as the Terminator. And that's probably not going to happen. But but something like that may happen. So where are we in that space and reasonably understanding? But that's where thinking through in what's actually going to be come to pass.
So I remember the first sticker that I made for my daughter when she was 6 was, passwords are like underwear. You don't show yours to others and don't share it with others. That's awesome. That is awesome. Right? So this was 15, 16 years ago. This was the sticker that I made for her. It was in cyber, so that was a natural thing as a father to train her up, right? Security is not just the security department's job, it's everybody's job, right? I think Ernie just touched upon that. And one thing as a platform builder, as a technology company, as we build it, normally security comes as an afterthought, right? Oh, I built this great building, now let me put a fence around it and put a gate and I'm done, I'm good. And the wall may be about 3 feet tall, nobody cares, but I got a fence around it, right? What we are doing is that we are ensuring that security is baked into the product as we build it from ground up. So every layer, security in depth, as you all may heard, right? Like, how do you build it in depth so that it is impossible for an adversary to crack through it, right? As many of you here and as your IT organizations, your vendors are building stuff for you, security should not be just a questionnaire checklist item that you're going through, right? Of course, yes, you got to do that from a CMMC compliance perspective and all, but is there a DNA within that organization that exists that says like, hey, we are taking security seriously, we make sure our code is built properly, analyzed for security vulnerabilities. Our certificates are proper. We don't have a supply chain issue. I'll give you one example on this. I worked for a large server manufacturer. We started to see some strange traffic in our network, and we narrowed it down to a fan in the server. Okay? That fan was, of course, supplied from China. It's one of the supply chain. In that fan, there was a firmware that had a backdoor. When we reached out to the vendor, they said, oh, we wanted to provide remote support. I'm like, what, for the fan? Right? But that fan firmware connected to the system BIOS. And you guys know where this goes up, right? Again, the supply chain issue comes again in this security check, right?
One thing you mentioned about security being baked in. The way I like to think about it now is, you mentioned your security, so you're going to build a wall around your building. What we need to think about it as, security needs to be part of, I'll call it the building code, that the building is designed that it's not going to collapse. That, if you're in an earthquake-prone area, that it has those certain structural points in it that it can survive a certain type of earthquake. We don't think about software, OT or systems in that sense. We think about it in the, okay, yeah, so I put a password, I won't let anybody in. Never mind that the underlying architecture is inherently fragile or all that. So it's changing that mindset. It's that software, it's that cyber-informed engineering. It's building that all in. And so that's why, you talk about from the workforce, that's where getting people to think about their cyber, any of their systems in that sense. That's, again, that's that convergence between the cyber and the physical, is thinking about your cybersecurity in the same sense that you think about your building and your physical architecture.
We had a question from the audience about drones, and it was a little bit more of a different take, and I'd like to put it out to the panel. So one of the thoughts I had about drones as I listened to this today was the fact that, are we really technologically able to do what we say we're going to do against drones? One of the big issues that we've talked about is the lack of jurisdiction of agencies to mitigate drone activity over their property or protecting a certain critical infrastructure. But I guess the question I have for the panel is, are we actually technologically able to do what we're telling people we want to do as security experts? Is that drone field so ever-changing so quickly that we may be chasing a car we're not going to catch? And I'll open it up to the panel.
I'll start on this one. So everybody is familiar with counter UAS, right? That's basically how you defeat autonomous systems. So there are multiple schools of thought. One, can you deal with it from a kinetic point of view? Can you send something to go boom on the drone? We did that in Israel and in the Middle East, but came at a really, really high cost for us. For a $50,000 drone, we sent a $600,000 missile to take it down. Right? Is it possible technologically? Yes, but at what cost? Then there are other aspects of it, right? Like, can I use an energy-based system, a laser, and take it down? But again, from a long distance point of view, and everybody's seen a laser pointer, right? Like the diameter of it. You have to be extremely precise to transfer that energy over there. And technologically, we're not quite there yet. But if it's close enough, we can take it off. And the third way we can defeat the drones is around using electromagnetic frequency, right? Like, how do I jam every signal in that area and things drop? The Ukrainians came up with a very clever idea to counter these EMFs, was using fiber, optic fiber cable. They attached to the drone 5 miles long cable that just went and went and went, right? Like, so nobody could take these drones down. So as we come up with some sort of a countermeasure, the adversary is going to improve on that. And we have to improve ourselves because our adversaries are thinking the same way of countering our unmanned systems, right? So technology is there. The will to implement it is another problem, and the will to continue to iterate it is another challenge that we are facing as we work. So.
Yeah, I would say we have a full UAS range. We can do some special things in 890 square miles. We have explosive range, so we've done a lot in space. Also, I want to mention on drones real quick on the cyberspace. A big issue when the issue came out about the foreign-made drones, 90%, there's some big federal agencies that use those for things like wildfire response. And the concern was data leakage. So we've done some work in doing an analysis on, what's going back from these video feeds and other information, which is a separate concern. But I would agree with Jags that it's not. Does the technology exist? Absolutely. To include technology that simply has the UAS just land safely, but at what cost? It's very costly. It's a very costly thing. So again, if you're going to protect critical infrastructure, I'll give you a similar example. We're seeing things about substation shootings, right? Okay, we've seen some in North Carolina, the big one in Metcalf several years ago, which could have been very catastrophic for Silicon Valley if they probably hit one more transformers. There's technology to protect substations from direct fire, but it is very costly. So until the technology and the counter technology catches up, it's going to be, if you're going to spend it on a thing that's going to cause the biggest impact. Not everything needs that right now.
Yeah, and that's actually, to bring it back, we just did a study as to why, for small to mid-sized organizations, why haven't they implemented some? What's their impediment to some of their cybersecurity type things? And cost was one of them. I mean, you've got a finite budget, so where do you put it? And we talk about it. We see drones. I believe one of the gentlemen up here from one of the ports was saying, "Yeah, I mean, we're worried about it, but we frankly don't see it. And if that's you got to look at it from your lens of what's the most likely, most catastrophic, et cetera. And if you've got to make hard choices as far as where you're going to put your resources, you're going to put your resources to the ones that's probably the most dangerous, and then the next is the most likely. Otherwise, hey, listen, it was great. I defended against this drone swarm, but the guy drove a truck through the front entrance, but we didn't stop that. Oh.
Thank you, guys. So I just would add to that what's that old saying? There's two types of people that have been compromised, those who know it and those who don't. So I think that's the same with the drone situation. Do you really understand what the activity is around your facilities, what people are curious about? I think from our perspective, what we've tried to do is try to understand, what does that activity look like? What are these people who are flying these things interested in? Again, go back to Ollie's thought about consequence. Am I really so concerned that there's 1,000 drones flying around my facilities, or should I be more concerned about those 3 or 4 drones that just seem to have an interest in something nobody else would normally have an interest in? And then can you verify that that wasn't launched from that facility for their legitimate purposes? So that's what the whole topic about drones is, really the focus on mitigation versus just intelligence about how these things are being used, both in a legitimate way and in a way that could really compromise us in the future. So we had a question about AI as it relates to workforce apprehension about AI. I enjoyed the conversation about the fact that, all these kids love AI. So they love certain things that technology can do for them. So I think the question, and I'm going to throw it out to the panel after I answer it, is, should the workforce be afraid of AI? I think there's been a lot said about AI when it comes to security, but I can tell you right now, the human element, the human senses that Ollie talked about, of a trained professional who actually works in that environment all day long, technology can't replace that right now. So how do we, in a thought, one or two thoughts from each of you on how do we integrate AI in a legitimate way into our security operations in a way that comes across as positive to the people that are going to have to work with that AI?
Yeah, I'm all about AI. In fact, do you think I know any of this stuff? I just chat GPT this last night, and what do 45-year security professional know about? Boom, boom, kicked it out for you.
Used to be stay at the Holiday
Yeah,
Inn.
yeah.
Now
The big
it's
thing,
ChatGPT.
the big thing I would say is the concept that people need to get used to when it comes to AI. First of all, if you don't use an AI or integrate, and by the way, AI has been around a long time in critical infrastructure. It's been around long. It just wasn't called AI. Many of you are familiar on the IT side with software assurance levels. That's going to be the next new trend. Is if you're going to integrate something to critical infrastructure, what is the equivalent software assurance level of that AI technology? You know, what large language models is it using? You know, how is it operating? That's the thing you're concerned with, because I guarantee you things like the National Aerospace System, who we work with, is very. When they integrate something, it takes years to integrate it because of the safety concerns. And the same thing in the maritime environment. So I think it's going to be, you're going to integrate it or you're going to be left behind, but you have to get into the business of where do I integrate it and does it meet a certain threshold before I do integrate in certain processes?
Yeah, I think AI, whether we like it or not, it's here to stay. It is a very, very powerful tool. It allows for so many things that we couldn't do before. When you mentioned the device the size of your hand on the seafloor, well, you can use AI now that would do a high resolution sonar scan and be able to detect that where you would not, where people would not be able to. So that's the type of capabilities that this is unlocking. I mean, the ability to do things at look at things that we had never seen before, analyze it quickly, and come up with new ideas and invents. It's remarkable. So I think it's a very good way. It's a powerful tool, but obviously it is a tool. You know, I think there's going to need to be. We mentioned human in the loop. We already think that way. I mean, you know, I think about it this way. If spell check is a prime example of that, right? The spell check doesn't change the word unless you say yes. So I think we're at the point of where do we want the human in the loop? So we've done that before. So I think we're making progress with that. But I think the thing that needs to be really considered, and this is from a friend of mine who, he used to work at the National Security Agency, and Ollie mentioned about AI being old and around, and this guy's same sort of, he says, you've probably heard the term garbage in, garbage out. But with AI and how that sends, we have to worry about garbage in and gospel out. So it's, the human in the loop is saying, okay, you're seeing something. Is that what I expected to see? That's where I think you start talking about the human in the loop, is looking at it from questioning, okay, I'm seeing this for a reason. Did I ask for this or something else telling me this, and that's where I think you're going to have to, that's the cautionary thing, I think, is just don't accept it as everything that comes out of it as gospel.
So I'm a techno-optimist. If I'm not a techno-optimist, I wouldn't be an entrepreneur, right? So I want to start with that. See, I'll give one example, right? Technology is there to accelerate your productivity. An example is during the Vietnam War, we used to have Navy photographers fly on a Huey, take pictures of the battle scene, send the film back to the States, develop it, and then the pictures would go back to the commander, back to Vietnam. Then they will make decisions. Guess what was the turnaround time? 30 days. Then they decided, oh shit, we can put the development, the black room, dark room in the ships. So then the turnaround time became a week to 14 days. Today, war is fought in the decision time of seconds. if not milliseconds, right? So think about that acceleration that has happened from a productivity perspective. Now, think about I would draw it in 3 vectors. The velocity of data that you're getting, the variety of data that you're getting, and the volume of data that you're getting. You have to make decisions on all of these things. Without a system that is capable of doing that, your productivity is not going to increase, right? AI is helping you solve these 3 problems. If you use it as a tool, your productivity multiplies, right? Back in the day when, I think there was this is a story that I read about San Francisco. The shit shovelers were upset that automobiles were coming in and taking, polluting the streets or creating noise in the streets because their jobs were going away, right? Think about the productivity increase that an automobile brought to humans, right? The challenge with AI is that it is bringing in exponential productivity, and we are unable to handle that and unable to wrap our minds around it. As long as you can grasp it and make it your slave to do your bidding, the world is ours.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes. Can I grab 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we finish? 1 question. The Grandmaster has said 1 question. Does anybody have a question out there for the crew here? Yes, ma'am.
So if there's an issue with training and thank you. So if there's an issue with training and you generally want most employees to be aware of cybersecurity, there's a couple of challenges that I've noted with there's been cuts to both the actual education, for example, degree programs at the graduate level, but also within companies. For example, AI is trained on code bases that could be out of date and introduce bugs via vibe coding. That's an issue that's going to probably be facing a lot of companies. But once the senior developers, who are the humans in the loop, once they retire, the junior developers are going to have to take over. But we've noted that there has been a decrease in the amount of hires. So there is some truth to AI being a threat to jobs. But there has to be some kind of commitment to training junior to senior developers because they're going to be the humans in the loop at one point. So what is Cyber Florida doing to not only address the gaps that are currently existing within the training pipelines in academia, but also from a private industry perspective? There has to be, junior developers have to take over the seniors. We don't live forever.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. The way, and we mentioned it, Ollie mentioned it earlier, when we looked at the existing workforce challenges, we found that most senior managers and leaders didn't understand cyber. But it's along those same lines is understanding that organizations, big or small, are going to have to learn how to manage their workforce better. And that includes pathways for junior folks to become senior folks. How do you do that? That's organizations, companies have to think that way because otherwise you have all this staff churn, and that's not something. We can create as many junior people as the world needs, but that's still not going to solve that problem on the inside. And so I think you've got that. And then we also did a study called the Search for Cyber Unicorns. And that was trying to understand the cyber workforce gap. Because it depends on who you talk to. In this area, there's 25,000 vacancies. But what does that mean and how does that, and it turns out that a lot of organizations, they have these vacancies, and they don't hire because they don't trust the individual. They have to build, it's important for them to trust those folks. But yet they don't, to your point, they don't have a built-in mechanism for internal workforce development. right? So, you know, there's those types of things. So what we do with that is that's when we talk about having these whether it's training resources, seminars, workshops for management folks and senior leaders to understand that type of that's a potential way to address that problem. Is that you have to look at it inside, because you're absolutely correct. It's not going to be something that organizations, they may try to, quote, hire externally from the outside to fill that, but the data doesn't bear that out, that they don't do that. They'd rather have that position go unfilled because they have to have somebody they trust, but they don't have a mechanism inside their organization to build that. So that's where we really engage with the management and leaders, the people that are making those human resource decisions and management to build that. That's kind of the approach that we take to it.
Thank you. And that's going to be it for us for time. I want to put in a shameless plug for the autonomous vessel out there. It's leaving at 3, so if you haven't had a chance to look at it or ask the gentleman out there about it, this is your last chance on your break. And with that, I'd like to say, again, first of all, thanks for your attention. Second, thanks for being here, because the diversity, I had the opportunity to look at the attendee list. The diversity here is amazing. And I think sometimes we get very myopic in our worlds about what we know is right or wrong, and security people can be the worst at that. It's my way or the highway. And just hearing the diversity of thought here today really moves the button along, moves the needle for moving forward where we're to these challenges that we've talked about here, and something near and dear to my heart, which will be talked about later this afternoon, the funding challenge, that all this stuff we just talked about we need. So with that, I'll say thank you to USF for putting this on, and thank you for your attention.